You can cut really intricate shapes with a CNC plasma cutter, but all I have is a regular plasma cutter, so I thought, what if I use a pantograph to do the same thing? What gave me this idea is this rotor pantograph, which I've used for many things that you'd normally need a CNC rotor for. And so I took this design and adapted it to fit a plasma cutter torch right here. I'm starting with some wood from my own sawmill, and I'm jointing it and planing it and table sawing it until I get some nice straight pieces. So now I have most of my pieces of wood cut to size. Now I want this gap in here to be maybe just 1/2 millimeter. So let's measure how much I've got in here, and then I'll cut this piece just a bit wider. I added 1/2 millimeter to the measurement, and now I just need to set the fence to that. I always save thin strips of wood like that because they make great glue applicators. I need holes exactly 1.5 centimeters from the ends, and I'm using my caliper set to 1.5 centimeters to score a line. I then set the caliper to half the width of the pieces to mark it laterally centered. And after that I use an awl to make a divot at the intersection of the lines. Now this part here is wider in the middle, so I can put the plasma torch through it without cutting away everything. And now I just need to cut away these pieces here. And I jigged that cut up on the table saw. And then I finished the cuts on the bandsaw. And then I cleaned the cuts up a little bit with a knife. Before gluing it together, I'm chamfering all the corners just a little bit, which makes the pantograph much nicer to touch. I don't usually show this step in my project because it's not very interesting and is not strictly necessary either. For gluing the links together, I'm just gluing them together one piece at a time. That way I can worry about the alignment when I'm only gluing on the last piece. The holes I drilled are kind of a tight fit for the shafts. So what I've done is I've cut a notch out of the end of one of the shafts so I can use it as a reamer to expand the holes a little bit. So it's really important that the rods on the end are square with the sides, and I'm pretty lucky here, these are square to begin with. So my clamps forced this out of square just a bit, so I'll just bring it back in. Now the ends of this part here need to fit around another piece here, and to make sure I'll have a little bit of room in there, I'm going to cut these down a little bit on the table saw here. I still need a bracket to hold the back of the pantograph, and that's going to be made out of these 3 pieces like this. I just need to drill the holes in it. I still need to figure out how to mount the plasma torch in here, and I figure a hole this size should be big enough. So that torch needs to come through about this far, and I figure it's best if I make something to support the handle out of this block right about here. And I made another block to go right here. I only screwed these blocks on because it's not unlikely that I'll change my mind how this torch will mount. With this just being side grain over such a small area, it has a good chance of breaking, which is why I'm adding a reinforcing screw before it breaks. Oops. Now this holder for the back of the pantograph is going to tilt on a couple of pieces of shafting, and I'm going to make a holder for that, and I'm going to bridle join these pieces together. Now the quickset 10 jig is the best way to make a bridle joint, but I'll show you how to make one without. Well, this is not as accurate as I was hoping it would be. I normally don't have to tweak the joints, so I really should have used the quickset 10 jig for this. I offset the holes a little bit to bring this up so I have room to tilt, but I'd like to be able to tilt back a little bit further so I can lift the pantograph off the sheet metal. So I'm going to have to cut a little bit off right here. The pantograph's follower goes in here, and I can adjust that up and down, but I need to clamp it this way, so I'm going to use this old furniture foot and a couple of washers and a T-nut, and that'll clamp it. I had been experimenting with the pantograph on the floor, but I realized I needed some kind of setup to hold the stock very well and my template. And the other thing is, this button here is kind of inconvenient to reach, so I made another button. And this button is just a little micro switch on a long cable, and it plugs into the control wire. I added a little jack on here so I can control this from here. And here's the results from some of my experiments. This is the bottom side, and apparently this is because I was cutting way too slow. Well, that's better. I still got quite a bit of beading on the edges. Well, I think this time I went fast enough because it barely came out. Wow, these gears actually work. Well, that's way better than I could have done freehand. So some of my cuts have got a minimum amount of slag on the bottom. Some of the other ones a lot more, and I guess it's just a matter of getting the speed just right and the distance to the metal. And this is where a CNC plasma cutter would have the advantage.